Hello, hello. Welcome to our live stream. Winging It is a show by Oddbird about web design, development, and our approach to solving problems. On today's show, we're talking about web components. I'm James Stuckey Weber and joined by fellow bird, Miriam Suzanne. And we are also very excited today to be joined by Zach Leatherman, creator of Eleventy and so many useful tools, usually with very funny names. So welcome, Zach.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I hope that you don't consider the possum and the bird to be natural enemies. I guess we'll find out today.
Yeah, I guess so.
We do get in a lot of fights.
Yeah, I don't think the possum normally comes out on top in those, but yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
Just ignore the two possums I have in my background. Wait, well,
we haven't,
what? No.
We haven't considered whether our possum or our birds are birds of prey or something less. So
yeah, I kind of doubt it. But...
Yeah.
Seems threatening unless you have some Star Trek background. Anyway, sorry.
Anyways, web components is what we're talking about today. And if you have any questions, please put them in the comments. We'll try to address as we go. We have Dave Rupert hissing vociferously, so we will do our best. I assume that is awesome there. So welcome, Dave. So yeah, web components. I think I was pretty excited to talk with the two of you about web components, partially because I think I've been watching what the two of you have been working on and using some of your tools and things like that, and helping out with Miriam some of the web components she's been working on, and it's been really interesting to see how those have evolved. And yeah, I think I've enjoyed seeing what you've been working on, and it's helped make things click for me. So I was curious for, let's say, Zach, but with both of you, Zach, when did web components kind of click for you? What was that thing that was like, oh yeah, this is why I need this technology?
Yeah, I mean, I think for folks that have maybe been in the front-end web development game for a while, web components seem like a very natural evolution of things. So I think that maybe the origin of the benefit of the web components for me comes from writing jQuery plugins and sort of seeing the annoying parts of developing those and having to select elements, and when content is injected into the page, then you have to like reinitialize those extra components that you're adding to the page manually, and you have to select all the new content, and all the new components need to be initialized. And it was just a lot that sort of went into the overhead of managing components on a page. And web components, I think, solves a lot of that quite nicely, just the custom elements part of the specifications. So yeah, I mean, I think it was just sort of rooted in pre-web components web development, which is maybe sort of a weird thing to say, but yeah, I think that's probably the first part of it for me.
I think you just ruined my hot take for the day, which was realize that web components are kind of like the new jQuery plugin. I was looking for like a split panel thing, and I was like, oh, I used to go back to this jQuery split JS, and it's great. And there's a React version of that as well. But now there's web components that do that much more easily without other libraries and things like that. And I was like, okay, yeah, this kind of makes sense. It's filling that gap of just like this ecosystem of things that the web needs. Yeah.
I'm curious, Zach, when, because I sort of remember looking at web components, I don't know, back in, 2015 or something, and being like, oh, well, you have to use Polymer. It doesn't seem quite ready. And then sort of just loosely having my eye on them since then. And I don't know, there's something recent that happened. I don't know if something changed, if something was launched, or if it was just a change in the community, a sense that, oh, these are really useful now. But it seems like something changed recently where they're actually getting picked up in a different way. Is that accurate, or?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a lot of truth to that. I think that the sort of umbrella term of HTML web components really caught hold for a lot of people. And yeah, they sort of took that banner. But I don't know that the technology has really changed all that much, just maybe the attitudes around the prevailing technologies that are very popular in front end right now. I mean, for me, web components is the strength, the core strength of web components is low dependency or zero dependency components. So as much built into the platform as possible, so you don't really have to worry as much about your heavier front end stacks with your bundlers and all of the extra sort of node modules things that go into front end nowadays. And so, yeah, web components is a great lightweight way to achieve that. And in that same vein, it makes it more ubiquitous and compatible with more tools too. I think one of the big use cases that maybe even cemented more of a clicking status for me in my brain is Markdown. So custom elements work great in Markdown, and most Markdown parsers work fine with that. And there was this sort of big movement in the React community to do MDX, which is like embedding JSX inside of Markdown, and you had to rewrite a bunch of tools and have a bunch of extra sort of ceremony on top of Markdown parser to handle this stuff. And it just sort of worked out of the box. And that was sort of a unique selling feature in Eleventy's world for a very long time, is that we could do this sort of dynamic components inside of Markdown, but I wasn't doing anything to accomplish that. It was just sort of provided for free. So it is sort of a testament to how much extra work you need to do sometimes to shoehorn things into your existing tools. And how much you can get for free when you use the platform.
My sense is that, yeah, web components, the parts of it that kind of make web components, they have been around for a long time, but there's been perhaps we're on the kind of the long tail of development or implementation of some of those things. And so I think some of those more recent things probably are making it a little bit less difficult to pick up and integrate into your process. And I think also things like making it, even if you didn't have to do anything to make it work in Eleventy, you show that off on your website that, this is something that you can do. I think just the dev tooling around it, even if it's kind of in a lot of ways already supported, I think that's probably one of the big things that has increased adoption.
Yeah, and I don't think that necessarily the sort of front and back end side of the component story is solved quite yet, even though I've tried to solve that historically. I don't necessarily also agree with how the React community has solved it either, but that's maybe a bigger discussion. But yeah, I think that's still an ongoing problem that we could do better at.
How would you describe that problem? What's the core of that?
Yeah, I think the core of it to me comes down to progressive enhancement and sort of where you draw the line between server rendered markup and client rendered markup. And you can sort of see the React community has changed on that over the years. And you can see more and more frameworks have sort of come around to this server rendered thing. But I don't necessarily think it's all or nothing as some, I think, frameworks buy into. A lot of server rendered stories right now are, we want the exact markup that would have been rendered on the client to be rendered on the server first. And that has performance enhancement drawbacks to it as well. So there is an awkward middle ground that needs to be almost decided on a per component basis. And so that's maybe a very difficult problem to solve holistically, if I might use a buzzword. Sorry, $1 in the...
Yeah, I mean, I've been noticing that there's some real simple versions of that question that I run into over and over when I'm building these web components. I mean, I find that some of the web components that I build really fall into like there is a clear progressive enhancement story. Like the slide deck component that I've been working on that I use for presentations. It's just, it's just HTML. It's fine. It works fine without the component registering it, and the component sort of adds all sorts of keyboard shortcuts and ways of storing what slide you're on and all that stuff. But you can still read the slides without it, right? So sometimes that's really clear. But then sometimes I want a component that its whole reason to exist is an interactive behavior. So it's there to provide some JavaScript. And then I'm like, oh, I want this to actually, I want it to not be there unless it's going to work. And I a little bit wish I had, so, some of those components, I want them to be block display by default. Some of them I want to be inline by default. Some of them I want to be not there by default and then become visible. And I sort of just wish there was an easy way to be like, this one, well, there's the hidden attribute has an until shown, and I sort of want a hidden until registered.
Yeah.
Or and some other variations on that, and like.
Yeah, I think you can use the colon defined pseudo selector for some of that.
But you would have to do that outside in the page. You can package that up with the component and.
Yeah, I mean, you could add a global style to your style sheet, and that's actually how I have a web component called island, and it's like a spicy lazy loader. It's like an islands architecture, but it's really just a lazy loader. And the whole premise of it is that it does like a colon defined CSS selector in JavaScript to see if components are defined, and sort of renames them.
Is there a demo or something around that?
Yeah.
Want to show how that works?
Let me see. Yeah, share my screen, present.
I feel like this is the thing I should be using.
Yeah, I noticed that some of our web components have some overlap. The things but I think that's just sort of a byproduct of things being very focused and very sort of, I don't know, you can create your own sort of low dependency things, and that can be very lightweight. Sorry, I'm still figuring out how to share my screen.
I get excited when I see lightweight web components, because I feel like a lot of the ones I've seen come with an entire design system embedded in them or something. And I'm always like, well, I don't know. That feels complicated to start using to figure out what else going on. Okay.
So this is like a stress test of an islands architecture page. It's just, I think it maybe has like 10,000 of these island components on it, and they only sort of initialize their child component content when they are visible. So you can kind of see it if I scroll really fast. The components will initialize. And the whole premise of this is it looks for any custom elements inside of the island element, and sort of renames them to a different tag name if they haven't been defined yet. So you can then define them at any point, but the component won't initialize until the island container renames them back to their original tag name. And so that's just sort of like a lazy way to lazily initialize web components, or custom elements, I should say more specifically.
How would you describe that difference? What's custom elements versus web components? What are you getting at?
I mean, when I don't personally, but I've sort of been called out for it before. Web components is just sort of this collection of different specifications put together, and
which is so custom elements and shadow DOM.
Nebulous, yeah. I think that there's, I don't know, 3 or 4 pieces of it, but yeah, I think web components is just like the umbrella term.
Mhm.
And custom elements, I think, is my favorite part of the umbrella. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, and then Island, is that right? Or island, or what is the
I refuse to say one or
okay.
the other.
Okay, is it possum or opossum? I think is the next question. But
Exactly.
Island, so then you can do it on when something is shown or is visible. I think remember there were some other conditions that you could add, like
Yeah, if you go back to the docs, let me zoom in. There are a bunch of different conditions here. There's on visible, on idle, which is just request idle callback, on interaction, which is JavaScript events, and it defaults to touch, start, and click. There's on media, which is an arbitrary media query. You can do like viewport dimensions or reduce motion, or there's a save data one as well. So yeah, there's a bunch of different ways you can sort of control how the content inside of it is loaded, and you can nest them as well too, which is yeah. I use this all over the place.
How did you land on the colon in your attribute names? I get questions a lot about whether it's legal or valid to even do custom attributes at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is legal to do your own arbitrary attribute names on your custom element. But if it's on sort of a built-in element, then it needs to be data prefixed.
In order to pass some validation, although I think it's fairly safe either way, as long as you've got the dash in it.
Oh, in the attribute name, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that might be
HTML
changing,
attributes. Right? Oh, okay.
No, I'm asking you.
I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know.
If there's
now we have
anyone
to find out.
watching who can quick check out the spec and get back to us, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, I thought I saw some discussion within the last month or two about custom attribute names, and yeah, having a dash in them. I don't know, that triggered something in my brain.
All right.
Oh, now I need to call back on the excellent Mastodon search to find out where that came from.
Thanks for that demo. And I think, Miriam, that actually was one of my questions while I was looking through. I think it was ground control. I noticed that you were using data prefixed attributes, which let you use the dataset API, which is kind of nice. But yeah, I was curious why are you using those instead of other attributes?
Yeah, I went with it just because it gave me a fair amount out of the box. I realized I had been building it around sort of custom attributes that I had named. And then I was having to manage, track when those attributes changed and get the attribute value and change the attribute value. And I just thought, oh, there's already an API for this. And it very simply answers that question. And to a certain extent, I think, like, I don't know, validation, when you get into custom stuff, part of the thing is it's not going to, right, validators are looking for HTML they recognize. And if you're working on stuff they're not going to recognize, what does it mean to be valid? But whatever.
Yeah.
But it sort of answers that question easily, right? Like I know data attributes are a thing. I can use them. There's already an API. I can already sort of watch those values easily. I mean, I still use the attribute changed callback just to make sure that I'm updating everything when it comes along. I don't know. In some ways, like I've been working on ground control because it's. I could do a demo of it. But I've been realizing that basically it's just invokers, right? It's like I've been wanting this thing for a long time, and somebody else was like, "Yeah, I want that too. We should make it a spec." And that was a clever way to go. I made it a web component instead. Share screen. Let's see. Yeah, so this is the demo page where just I've created a bunch of them and documented sort of what attributes I'm setting. So like you said, they're all data attributes, data prop, data session. So what these are is I can take an input or any sort of input control or toggle buttons, or these are also just switch, just buttons with a switch style. And it's really just applying aria press true or false. And then based on, I can say that it should have a particular target. So I can say data for something. If I don't set that, it is the root by default, right? So if I don't have data for, I can set properties or attributes, or, right, this is data event. This is looking at what event is it using to get that data. So on input, it then broadcasts to, in this case, the root element, and sets the property that I tell it to set. So a little bit different from invokers in that it's not generally triggering an event on the target. It's setting a property or an attribute. So that one is looking for all the headings and changing their font family, and then saving it to local storage, which something is covering up my buttons there. I can't see. But yeah, so it's sort of invokers, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose part of the reason I use this a lot is because, like, on my website, I like having user-controlled styles. I like not just providing a theme switcher, but like a font size switcher and a font family switcher, and like how many switchers can I provide to you, and let you choose your own colors. And so I like it there, but then also, you know, a lot of my job is making demos. So they're really useful for making a demo of something. So I use this over and over.
It's a nice, if you set up a random one, it can be a nice fuzzer for your user interface too.
Yeah, which I don't think would be hard to add to it. I've been trying to, because for a long time I've been using buttons sort of like this that just set the property or the attribute. And I've been trying to build these such that I can tie into the events themselves. I can build I can use it as a base class to build a new custom element that, like, I built a CSS on-off toggle that just uses the ground control and extends it by saying trigger these events also in addition to setting a property or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, base classes is, I think, a very interesting discussion to go down as well. To me, I really try to avoid at all costs using a base class for things, even though sort of my computer engineering, computer science background has
Why is
been
that?
sort of, well, I want it to be zero dependency all
Right.
the way down to the individual component level. And that's sort of why I have trouble with all the existing sort of, I don't know, web component implementations that and libraries.
Like
I'm not gonna
lit
say a
and
problem. Yeah,
yeah.
a problem is not the right word.
Yeah.
That I towards not using those things, because I want as much sort of long-term usage out of the individual component as I can get,
Right.
and ruthlessly eliminate all dependencies, even at the cost of a few more, I don't know, lines of code in each individual component. I'm fine with a little bit of repetition in the component code to achieve that goal.
Yeah, I've so far not even bothered learning lit, but I keep seeing advice that I should be learning it, and I feel like, well, why?
I mean, if I were making if I were an application team, or I were working at a large company that was making a bunch of components for maybe reuse throughout the company, I would definitely use lit because it provides that nice base for a large scale application team or a bunch of teams to work together. I think that there's a bunch of great features in there. But no, when it comes to sort of things that you're just shipping to the web sort of piecemeal, or you have like a bunch of different projects that are very decoupled from one another, or you want to provide maybe individual components that can be reused for folks. Yeah, I think that's the use case that I'm normally in now. I used to work at a giant Fortune 100 company, and yeah, I sort of understand the benefits. I worked on a jQuery reusable library at a huge company many years ago, and yeah, I think that the use case there really makes sense, and I hope that that keeps chipping away at sort of the React foothold that is very prominent now.
Right. So you could think of lit as, well, I suppose not a replacement for everything that you're trying to do with the React, but
here we go, spicy take.
But a little bit of a framework of like we're gonna build so many things on this guy that it's gonna be worth it in the end.
Yeah, and that's sort of the continuum where you sort of start at this reusable base class, right? And I'm trying to exist as much beyond that as possible.
Scott had a question about that. Can you elaborate on the nice foundation that lit provides? What is the foundation there?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, a lot of it is just a nice reusable base class. It gives you some reactivity, so you can sort of use your data model to automatically update your components front end, which is great. Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of sort of nice things built into the lit docs that we could go through, but I haven't used it for any large projects.
Yeah, I suppose none of us have, or have. Yeah. Go ahead, James.
I haven't used it for a large project, but one thing that is nice. It provides. I think it's more analogous to a Vue or a React or a Svelte or something like that, where it is more of that. It provides more, and the distance between those libraries that people are used to using in web components rather large. But if you're coming to lit, it's like, okay, this makes more sense. One of the nice things I found recently was lit has a nice task where just fetching data, which is depending on what you're doing in your web component, you might fetch data. And lit has a nice API where you just say, here, do this task. It's an async task that when it's in the pending state, here's my template for that. And when it's done, here's my template for that. And when it's there's an error, here's the template for that. And it's just it was a lot more ergonomic than writing like a mini state machine inside my web component around fetch. I mean, which I can do, but it provides some of those easy things, and not needing to think about your template inside your web component near as much as you do need to inside a web component.
Yeah, Dave Rupert in the chat is giving some more. I won't list them all, but some more things people can look into.
Yeah.
There. Yeah, but I think there is a similar thing that we're doing, Zach, where we're both mostly playing with small components that are packaged up and standalone. It's really the standalone use case that we've been playing with.
Yeah, and I sort of really love my components to be as decoupled as possible because they last the longest.
Sure.
And they require the least amount of maintenance for me personally. So yeah, it's kind of a selfish thing, I suppose. But
yeah, that makes
yeah,
sense.
I guess my concerns are different than a larger application team as well.
Yeah, I'm interested in the balance there, because I sort of, when I started building out these ground control components, I started with them all separate, and then I was like, oh, like there's this one chunk that they're all doing, and when I want it with a slider, I also want it in the same site with buttons. I may as well reuse the broadcasting system from a single component and then build on it.
Yeah, I guess I think of it in terms of when I want a piece of functionality and I wish that this existed. I don't feel like there is like a web component search engine. I wish that one did exist. I could just go out and search for a component. But for me to buy into a component's base class, a component's upstream library or framework, that each one of those steps is just like a huge hurdle to jump over when I just want to solve one problem. And I think that if we can keep our code as focused on solving one problem and one problem only, then you just get a lot more longevity out of it, and you get a lot more life out of the component as well.
Yeah. Jumping back just slightly, a comment from Michael Potter at Red Hat. We're shipping lit-based design systems and lots of mini applications to sprinkle around our various content management systems. And I think this is a place where lit has been seeing a lot of growth. I think Shoelace is built in lit, which is a design system that that's gaining some popularity. There's Adobe's Spectrum web components or Spectrum design system is web component based with lit. So yeah, I think that where you are you are building like an internal design system or a design system as a product. I think that those make sense. I think that's if you're looking at like React's MUI or MUI or whatever, however you pronounce that, or even Bootstrap. A lot of these are needing to wrap up both template and functionality, and usually accessibility is what gets thrown out the window in the last minute implementation of it. And so I think web components kind of provide this way of packaging it all up and making that a little bit more usable and more similar to developers throwing in an input or a text area or whatever element they're used to using.
Yeah, I think there's a whole bunch of other sort of considerations that go into how you want to package up a library of components too, versus if you want to ship individual components. Yeah, and it's sort of, I don't know. I think it's a very maybe individual decision that people have to make based on their requirements and their situation. But I'm also like okay with sort of bundling a component with some upstream library code as long as the developer experience is right. I think that if you sort of use web components as a compile target, if I might use another dollar in the jar buzzword, that you can build a component like a web component in Svelte even, and sort of compile it to web components, and it just sort of packages that library code in upstream. And to me, that's a very similar decision to if you're using a base class and you just package all that base class code into the distributor that you want folks to consume when they use your component. Now, you might not get the greatest reuse story out of that if you start to use 2 or 3 components that all have that sort of upstream code embedded. But yeah, I think it's important to be aware of those decisions and not have them be made for you by the upstream library.
One thing I noticed in our demos is that both of those demos were very much taking advantage of the I guess more JavaScripty side of things. And I was curious, Zach, if you'd be willing to show off your fundraising status web component. That's kind of on a different side of a spectrum, where the web component is I'm not quite sure the language here, but it contains all the data. It contains all the information. Let's see.
Right. It's not an interactive web component. It's a
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you go to the Eleventy docs right now, we have at the very top this sort of sustainability, fundraising, sort of progress bar. It is just basically a progress bar. And this is maybe one that I'm not super proud of because it does have a fairly heavy client rendering story to it, which, yeah, is not super great, but that is what it is. So yeah, this is the demo page for the fundraising component, and you can sort of just feed it sort of a min and max value, and it just sets those on a progress element and uses the slot if you want to put in some content over here. And then this is like a terrible max width on this demo, but yeah, and then it sort of shows you the amounts here on the right. But if you disable JavaScript for this demo, nothing shows up. So it's like not a great one to demo. But I do have like sort of like a blog post about, I tried to make like a taxonomy of the web components that I've built. And I've sort of divided them into HTML web components, and I have a bunch of those, and those have a very good progressive enhancement story to them, even though some of them use Shadow DOM. And I know in the web components community, there's sort of been this notion that if you use Shadow DOM, it can't have a great progressive enhancement story, which is not fair, even if you're doing JavaScript-based Shadow DOM and not declarative Shadow DOM. But anyway.
Yeah, I think going back to a thing I was saying earlier, there's sort of the like things that I don't want to appear until I know that there's JavaScript and it's registered.
Yeah.
And I always feel like that Shadow DOM is perfect for that. Like I know that if it shows up,
yeah,
it's going to be able to do its thing.
Yeah, I think perhaps a sadder example of that is that I guess I've sometimes been tempted to almost hide accessible content inside of Shadow DOM, which I've felt the temptation to do that, right? Because Shadow DOM content is not always the most accessible content. But I think as time goes on and those problems are fixed, that that should not be something that's relied upon. So don't do that. No one do that. Yeah, and then I guess I have like this other category, which is JavaScript web components, which is the exact thing that you were talking about. It's sort of heavy client rendering parts to them, and I've sort of tried to use those as more optional content, stuff that I'm okay with not showing up before JavaScript or if JavaScript fails. And just as one example of that, I do have like this like hamburger menu here on my website, and I love to show this off because it only shows up on desktop, so it's only a desktop hamburger menu, and it just like animates this like rainbow road. Yeah, and it's just kind of fun, and I'm okay with that just being a JavaScript only thing because it couldn't do anything without JavaScript. So
right.
Yeah, that's I think a silly use case for it, but I think I also have another one maybe that shows up in the footer if my code is going to load. Maybe it's only on my homepage. It's like this lighthouse score component. And yeah, I think that actually goes out and fetches data. So that's a JavaScript only one as well. But it's not like a core piece of the page, so it's not really necessary for anything other than my vanity, I suppose. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I like that taxonomy. I think when I first heard HTML web components, and I think some of the demos that came out around that term are what grabbed me. But I find the term a little confusing because when I dug into it, it means that I'm only writing JavaScript to make an HTML web component. And I was like, wait, I was looking for one where I only write HTML and I get a web component.
I mean, yeah, I understand that that's extremely not intuitive because it is sort of the opposite of what you would expect. But yeah, I think that when you get to upcoming specifications like declarative custom elements, that might be more in line with what you were thinking in terms of HTML web components. But yeah, I mean, I think the crux of HTML web, it starts with sort of light DOM markup. It starts with already server rendered markup. And that again goes back to this awkward discussion that I think we'll have at some point about the all or nothing progressive enhancement story that tells. And yeah, we sometimes need to modify our server rendered content with JavaScript to have it be interactive in the right way.
Yeah, I like that way of saying it. Yeah, that maybe having an everything is server rendered. It's a good alternative to have, but it doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Yeah, I mean, it's so awkward because it feels like for so many years when React was like client rendered everything should be client rendered first, and they were beating that drum for a very long time, and everyone else was like, wait, no, we need server rendered things for all of these very good reasons. And so it's nice that we're getting at least to a point in the nuance of the discussion that we can start to talk about the usefulness of some client rendered things. But it does maybe feel like the pendulum is swinging in my own brain, but I'm just like trying to like thread this needle of getting to the right spot without sort of, I don't know, buying into all or nothing of one or the other side.
Yeah, and it does seem to me like from experience trying out different components, where you land, there's not a right place to land. There's a right place per component. There's a
right.
Yeah,
and that's
and
what
trying
makes
to
our
figure
job
out what
so interesting too.
Yeah, trying to figure out what is the no JavaScript fallback of various components is interesting because clearly there's some where there's sort of there is nothing. The hamburger menu should go away if you can't click it.
Yeah, I was curious, Zach, for the fundraising one, what would be I guess your ideal if you had unlimited time to rewrite that in just the right way?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I were to ship a next version of that, and I may be motivated to do that after this talk today, that I would just start with a progress element base and go from there. Because I mean that is the core content of what it is. So I might do just a conditional where it looks for a progress element as a child, and if so, it uses that, and if not, then it creates one. So I could go both ways with it, and that would still be very lightweight.
Yeah.
If only you had more money to work on something like that.
Unlimited money, unlimited time, and eventually we can make the perfect component, right?
Yeah. Oh, and then are we all done?
The perfect component exists, and then we can all go home,
sign off Slack, and be done for the day.
I think there's a few people in the chat we could assign that to.
Yes.
And then maybe
we can volunteer.
Well, I'm curious, are there things that you haven't done yet with web components that you want to try out that, given the unlimited time, once we finish the web 3.0 or whatever we're on now, we're done and can sign that off, ship it. What do you want to do? And what are you curious to play around with it with web components?
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious how much I should say, but I'll just say it. I don't care. Yeah, I guess I would like to make like a layer that makes websites more editable and interactive. I think that would be a very cool thing to have. Um, Even going back to like just describing a core use case of leaving a comment on a website, I think it would be very cool to have a comment web component that then ships that data to somewhere on the like an arbitrary data container on the web that you could then use on your website in various ways. So yeah, I think just making the web more editable, I think is a very good goal, and yeah, I think web components could play a very amazing part of that. Um, yeah, and I hope to work on that maybe soon.
That's exciting. Yeah, I mean, that's how I think we should talk.
We should
Yeah,
talk in front of everyone, or we should talk
yeah,
after this
sure.
call.
No, yeah, I mean, I think I agree. I mean, I just keep in a lot of my talks, I talk about the history of the web, and the first web browser was an editor. It was a web editor, and I just want to like, the goal of the web should just be to get back to that. That's what we're trying to get back to. How did we lose that perfection of an easily editable web?
Yeah. I think for me the ultimate goal would be to almost let anyone edit any website, but have it be more like a source control model where I can contribute changes to any website, and they can accept or not accept those changes, and what the developer experience of that might be. But I fear I've all already said too much.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. There's some attack vectors that might be worth considering.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I come at the problem from the notion of, I mean, so many years ago, I originally joined Netlify like 4 or 5 years ago or whatever, because I wanted to sort of compete against WordPress. And WordPress has this sort of model of the CMS that everyone uses, and they have their own sort of attack problem. So I mean, the bar is pretty low in terms of secure websites and in that vein. So yeah, I think we can do better.
Oh, that's great to hear. I'm curious to see where that goes.
Sorry, spicy take.
I like spicy. Yeah, I don't know if I have any more specific. I mean, I think I keep running into things where I'm just like, oh, this could be a web component, and then I make it a web component, and it's often about like, I'm trying to put an album on a website, and I'm trying to figure out, well, wait, do I have to use one of these weird embedders from some third party? Can't I just do it using some audio elements and some buttons that control them? That seems so then, that sounds like a web component. So I build a web component around it. I don't think I have a backlog at this point, or a list of, but then with each one, the thing that is really interesting to me is the progressive enhancement story. Like, I made myself, I often want random content on my website, but then like also a button so you can randomize again. So I made an 8-ball. But then thinking through, like, what is the fallback of that? What do you want if you've got 8 random items to choose from and you're going to display one of them? There's 2 potential fallbacks. One of them is you just show one and you don't have a button, and the other is you show all 8. And so it's like trying to build it so that it can have either of these fallback approaches depending on the situation. I don't know. That's the place where I always get really interested. It's like, well, wait, what is the fallback of this?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of goes back to the original thing you were saying about your slideshow component, or the presenter. I forgot the name of it already. Sorry, but
slide deck.
Yeah, slide deck. I was curious how you handle sort of nested media inside some of those extended slides. I feel like on my sites, whenever I do like a slide deck, it can be quite large to load images in those sort of extended slides that you haven't navigated to yet. But the progressive enhancement story is, yeah, all of that stuff will be available in the server rendered markup. So it needs to be invisible somehow, so it isn't loaded.
Yeah. Well, that's I've just used lazy load attributes and gone with it. And I don't know if I should be doing better than that, but it's like it gets me through a presentation, so I've stuck with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it sort of comes down to how you load your CSS then. As long as the CSS is available up front to sort of have the overflow container correct and to make sure that that media is, or those images or videos or whatever it might be, are far enough off viewport that they won't be they won't trigger download. I think that that's fine.
Yeah.
But it all comes back to like the low dependency thing that we keep talking about is really comes back to the waterfall of the assets that you load on your page. Like, how do you load your CSS? How do you load your JavaScript? How do you load your images? It's all of those things are sort of very connected. And if you can't agree on some of that stuff up front, it affects everything down the line. And that's why it was, I think, still very hard to buy into some of these heavier JavaScript frameworks, is that they've made a lot of those decisions in a way that I didn't agree with for a very long time. And so I couldn't even get on board the train from the beginning because the assumptions were all wrong. And yeah, it was making my websites too slow to even buy into that stuff. Which was hard and still hard.
Yeah, I mean, this is maybe a weird tangent, but yeah, I think a lot about how that approach, the approach that became the last decade of front-end development, how much it caused problems for CSS in a way that drove the dislike of CSS in a lot of the industry. And like how much of that came from the tooling. People don't like CSS because the tools they have to use it are bad. Well, or yeah, I mean, sort of make the language worse in some interesting ways. But
yeah,
that is not the topic of the day.
How do you feel about best practices? Do they work or don't work?
Best practices. Oh, Zach, you're fired.
We gotta get some views. We gotta get some views here.
It might be late in the stream for that.
I mean, when it does come back to like the progressive enhancement story, I do maybe always come back to I built this like image comparison component, like 7 different ways to progressive enhancement stories.
Yeah,
maybe I could show that real quick.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Image. Oh no, where is it? Oh, here it is. I found it. Okay. Awkward dead air. Awkward dead air. Here we go. Boom. Okay, now I'm sharing. And I did it using WebC, but you could sort of do this with any sort of server rendered component or server rendered template language. But yeah, there's I mean, at its core, it's just a way to compare 2 different images, and you've probably seen these all over, but it's got a slider in the middle and it's got an image on the left and an image on the right. The one on the left is just a white background and the one on the right is the yellow background. And yeah, I sort of built each one of these twice, and this is the first one that it's just 2 images and they're layered on top of each other. So the rendering is like the same, which is good when you're talking about like cumulative layout shift or content layout shift, which can ding you on your like Lighthouse scores or your core web vitals. So yeah, and then another strategy is sort of just to disable the interactivity until
Right.
until it's defined, and that's fine too. And then another one is to sort of hide the interactive element. And this is just uses an example of like this 50-50 where it just sort of divides it down the middle as a default rendering. And you can use that, or you could use only show the left one or the right one. That's another way. This, I think, is just a different way of hiding that content. Using a JavaScript template. This one's declarative shadow DOM, which is, again, looks the same as some of the other strategies, but it's just a different way to implement it. This one is using has and radios to actually give like a functional, which is, I don't know what I was thinking here, but
It's
maybe going a little bit too deep, but it does make it functional pre-JavaScript, which is something, I don't know. And then this is just an opacity.
Oh yeah, opacity, yeah.
But no, I mean, none of these, I think, maybe how folks traditionally build these slider components, and that is just to show both images side by side. And I think these demos were kind of trying to highlight the server rendered story, and yeah, again, that sort of awkward middle ground between server rendered markup and client rendered markup, and how much content layout shift you want to avoid. And yeah, I think it just, all of these decisions need to be made on a per component basis, because every component is different and has different considerations. And even the ones that I build that are reusable components, in your application, your requirements might be different and require a different strategy, which is just further complicates things. But yeah.
No. And Zach, just so you know, there is now a CSS and HTML no JavaScript way of doing an image slider with anchor position. You can drop the anchor or one of the images based on that input slider, and it works.
Oh, amazing! So I need to redo and add another demo here and just delete all these other ones now.
I don't know if you can say that anchor positioning itself just works at this point.
Yeah,
but
I did play with that a little bit yesterday, and it caused my Chrome DevTools to crash every time I inspected the element, which was surprising. But I've never reliably crashed DevTools like that every single time.
That is a
hopefully to get that fixed.
Well, it looks like we are up at the end of our hour, so I think this has been a really great conversation. I've really enjoyed hearing from both of you about how you're thinking about this and their plans for next things to take over the world, etc. From our side of things, Oddbird side, we do have a few talks coming up. You can visit oddbird.net/talks. Miriam has some great talks on how to use CSS. I'm going to really incorporate that. We can there's some pre-scheduled ones, and we can also bring those to your company if you want something tailored to your specific needs. Zach, you've had an exciting year. What do you want to promote for things coming up?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big push I have right now is I'm trying to make Eleventy independently, sustainably funded. And so we're doing a fundraising push. We talked, I guess, hinted at that a little bit with the fundraising status component that I released. That was in no way related to this at all. No, I'm kidding. It was, I shipped it directly for that blog post that's showing on the screen now. And we're trying to make a long-term sustainable open source project. So
great. Thanks.
Yeah, go contribute.
Yes. Well, please visit oddbird.net/wingingit to access all the links and resources that we talked about in this show. And on the next Winging It, we will continue our conversation about CSS Grid. So join us live on Tuesday, September 17th at 1 p.m. Eastern for that. And if you'd like to support us, please like and subscribe. And if you want even more from Oddbird, sign up for our newsletter. And I'm not seeing the link for that there, but it's oddbird.net/oddnews, or just go to our website and you can find it. And thank you. And remember, best practice is a conversation. So let's keep talking. Thanks a lot, everyone. Bye.
I guess that's how we feel about best practice.
It's a conversation.